If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Rangers, campers, what are your unexplainable and downright creepy stories? I'm a soil conservationist for the USDA. I spend a lot of time out looking at cropland and CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, prairie restorations. Needless to say, it's not uncommon for me to find myself miles from the nearest road. One time I was out looking at CRP in a heavily wooded area of my county. I was probably half a mile or so off the road on a trail when I came upon a small clearing with what appeared to be an abandoned playground and school bus. There was a rusty swing set and a huge rainbow merry-go-round. Alone this would have creeped me out, but I was truly terrified to see the merry-go-round spinning extremely fast. There was no wind in the clearing, so somebody, or something, had to have been making it spin. I called out and nobody answered. I turned around and left. I figured it may have been an old school, so I took a look at our old maps and asked our archaeologist to look into it. We couldn't find anything about it. I haven't gone back. I told my boss he could go look at it. Not sure if he ever did. I'm not a superstitious person, but this made the hair on my neck stand up. I own land in the mountains and camp there sometimes. One night I was awake around 4 a.m. lying still in my hammock looking at the stars. Then disturbingly close by, I heard the unmistakable sound of something big, with a big bladder, urinate. I could clearly hear the sound change as the hard dry dirt became wet, then a small puddle, then a muddy puddle as the stream went on and on. The most common animals large enough to pee that long and loud are deer and coyotes, and there are also bobcats and rarely wolves and bears. Never figured out what it actually was. I fell back asleep and woke when the sun was well up. No prints or telltale puddle to be found. This isn't a ranger story but a Marine story. A buddy of mine is a Marine and was doing an exercise deep in the woods with his unit one day and he eventually got lost. After walking around for about an hour trying to figure out where he was, he came across 3 guys and asked them for directions. They pointed him in the direction of his camp and he was able to get back. Shortly after he got back, him and his unit started to pack to leave, so he told his sergeant that there were still guys out in the woods. His sergeant said that he was the last one back and they were waiting on him to leave. He told his buddies about it and it turns out that another unit that did exercises in that area way back in the day had 3 Marines go missing. There have been other Marines that got lost in that same area say they had the same experiences of running into 3 guys that pointed them in the right direction. I am not a ranger, but my neighbor used to be one for the National Park Service. He told me 2 stories that were eerie. My favorite is the time he was making the rounds at a park in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a gorgeous night with a bright moon, clear skies, and a nice 75 degrees. Anyways, 30 minutes into his shift and he felt something liquid tap onto his shoulder. Even though at a clear night he didn't think anything of it because it could be an animal doing its business up in the tree. Anyways, he wiped it away only to notice that the liquid was sticky. He flashed his light on his fingers and saw blood, which startled him but not as much as what he saw next. When he shined his light up the tree, way up top was the carcass of a mangled male deer. Its body was totally ripped up and twisted. Obviously seeing this is creepy as heck, but what really bothered him was that the tree the deer was hanging from was really tall and difficult to climb. The first 20 feet of the tree had no branches and the deer carcass was maybe 100 feet up in the tree. When he went back the next day he was able to verify that. I argued that it was a cougar or some other mountain lion. However, he didn't think a cougar would stash their prey that high up. Also, he told me that there were no cougars in that park, let alone in the state. This happened at New River Gorge National Park in West Virginia. This is a huge 65,000-acre park with the 3rd tallest bridge in the USA, mountains to climb, and tons of trails that wander and meander about. Anyone who has walked nature trails knows that sometimes you will come across side routes, such as deer trails or bike trails, that veer off the main trail. My friend didn't work at this park, but being a park ranger, he loved parks and would go to various national parks on his time off to see everything America has to offer. He loves this park and usually hiked a couple standard trails. On one trail, he noticed a very faint trail that veered off the main trail, maybe a deer trail. He was in an adventurous mood that day and decided, what the hell, let's see where this one takes me. Walking down the trail was not easy. It wasn't entirely visible, and he had to really focus to figure out where it was and where it was leading. A good practice that later came in handy was that he purposefully marked his trail with broken branches so that it would be easier to find his way back later. He went about doing this at least a couple miles until he came across this beat-up abandoned building. It wasn't a small building either, it was about maybe 2,000 square feet in size. Basically, it wasn't some cabin. Now, Finding abandoned buildings in this park isn't entirely unexpected. New River Gorge National Park contains ghost towns which you can run into when you go your own way. However, this wasn't a ghost town, at least he didn't think it was, but it was getting dark around this time, so maybe the visibility wasn't good enough to tell? It was just a building in the middle of nowhere, just like in all the cliché horror stories. So what does my friend do? Obviously, he has to go up to it and snoop around. So he goes up to inspect the building, only to discover it isn't in the worst shape. It is still a relatively functional building. The windows are intact. Roof contains no holes or even much mold/moss on top. The outside is still intact. No holes. No openings. When he looks inside, he notices that it is a church. Curious, he tried the front door and it actually opened. He walked in and snuck around quietly. So, this is where it got creepy. Once he had a better look inside, he noticed several things. 1. This wasn't an abandoned building. The inside was pretty clean and appeared maintained. No outside debris, the furniture inside was not worn out with age and neglect, the altar had a book that was worn but still functional, and the most obvious sign that someone was using the place, there was some garbage on the floor and some ornaments there that looked relatively new. 2. And this is what I find more creepy, but at the same time wonder whether it was true since he was drunk, is that the church wasn't a Christian church. The ornaments were not Christian ornaments. In fact, he had never seen anything like them. Also, the book on the altar wasn't the Bible but some other weird text that he did not recognize. Anyways, when he realized that book wasn't the Bible, he didn't stick around to figure out what it was. His skin immediately went on edge and he got that sick feeling that he was being watched. He slowly and carefully made his way out when he swears he heard something, and that it when he bolted down the trail he came from. It was really good he broke those branches earlier because that made the trail way more visible and made it possible for him to just rush out of there. Now, I am not really sure whether he actually was being watched and whether he heard something. He could have just been paranoid at that point, which caused him to hear things. But, it is kinda creepy thinking there is this church in the middle of nowhere that is supposedly being used too, who knows what it is being used for. I wish he had taken a picture of that book. I always wondered why he didn't report the building. He told me he did, but everyone assumed he just stumbled upon an abandoned building on the outskirts of a ghost town, or maybe it was the only building that survived since churches are sometimes better constructed. Anyways, he didn't fight it and did recognize that maybe he let his nerves get the best of him. However, he does feel deep down that there was something weird about that building, so who knows? I was a ranger for Glacier National Park in northern Montana. We got a call around 3 Amish for camper in distress near our post but would require a 45 minutes hike through some pretty rocky terrain to get there. So we geared up and start hiking. Me and my partner are about 30 minutes into our hike when I just get a gut feeling that something isn't right. Keep in mind it's pitch black, only using headlamps in the middle of grizzly territory. We are about 10 minutes out and we start to hear this sound of a baby crying, so we kick it into high gear and start shouting and moving faster until I notice something odd and my gut completely dropped. The sound of the child crying was played on a loop. It was the same cry over and over again. I told my partner to stop and listen to prove I wasn't going crazy. He was a new hire and I just saw all the color on the kid's face vanish when he realized also. We decided to hightail it out of there, fearing for our lives in the unknown. Never got another call of a stranded camper after we left. I still get chills telling the story. I went camping on a mountain with a friend. We had a fire going and were just chatting and messing with the fire when I heard a very faint sound that distracted me from the conversation. I told my friend to hush up for a second and we both listened closely. We could hear a woman singing in the distance what sounded like a really old medieval melody. We couldn't make out what it was because she was singing in another language. We were far and away from any other campsite, as we like to camp in our own spots away from anything that could potentially have other people. Creeped us out, but what makes it freaky is I ended up posting pictures of our camp on Facebook, and another friend recognized the location and asked if I heard anything weird. I said, "Why do you ask?" He went on to explain how him and another of our mutual friends were nearby that campsite on a different night with one of their dogs and they heard a woman crying as she was coming down the road that passes by the site. They decided to check on her to see if she was alright, but when they got to the road and called out to her, there was no response and the crying immediately stopped. They thought it was strange, but decided to head back to the camp. When they got back they found their dog convulsing by their fire and foaming at the mouth. They grabbed him and got in their car and started hightailing it down the mountain. He said the dog went limp in his arms on the way down, and he thought it died, but once they reached the bottom of the mountain the dog woke up immediately and acted like nothing happened. They immediately assumed there was something evil in that area. When he was telling me this story, I turned white as a ghost, and once he finished, I explained what my other friend and I heard near our camp. It really freaked me out, because my buddy with the dog ended up going up the mountain with me, and showed me where everything went down, which happened to be exactly where I was hearing the singing the night I went camping. I saw this on a documentary about some forest rangers, and it still gives me chills to think about. In a national park in some hard to reach, rocky secluded climb was a camp known for weird shit happening. One of them is when the group was camping in the middle of the night when the most unusual, demonic sounds came bellowing from across a gorge. The campers could tell that it was two different creatures going back and forth, and the sounds and frequencies were impossible to be human or any known animal in the area. If I'm not mistaken, this happened on different occasions, and there was an actual recording taken, which is really freaky to hear. In a separate occasion in that same spot, while sleeping inside their camp structure consisting of logs and sticks, they heard the unmistakable sound of their camp being trashed and ravaged by very large, strong animals which they assumed to be bears or another animal. Fearing for their lives and waiting it out until morning, they were shocked to find the camp completely untouched. The final story at this same location is in the middle of the day. While sitting for lunch, a horizontal beam of white light almost resembling a fluorescent bulb gently floats across the campsite before everyone, before stopping and disappearing. They eventually decommissioned the campsite and I believe hid the location. I'm not telling it as eerie as it conveys, and I wish I could find what it was from, but I believe it was a documentary with a story about Tom Messick SR and other forest mysteries, which are all a huge trip. I used to work for an environmental non-profit that contracted out the Park Service. I was in Monte La Salle National Forest on a fuels reduction project, working pretty far down a long ATV trail that was accessed by an incredibly steep switchback. It was the last day of the project, and our project partners in the Park Service had been schlepping gear out all day. One of them was an absolutely gargantuan man, probably about 6 feet 5 inches and with ginger hair, but darker, like mixed with rust. He had been helping me with a lot of the heavy swamping, clearing the chopped up debris from my chainsaw, for the duration of the month-long contract. I was hiking back at the end of the day alone like an idiot. The rest of my crew was a half-mile or so behind me. I like to push myself on hikes to keep myself in shape. I was coming around a wide bend in the trail, heavy foliage to my left, when I heard a rustling coming from behind the impassable wall. I slowed down and craned my neck. I'm pretty tall myself, 6 feet 3 inches, and saw what looked to be the shaggy mop of my project partner through the small gaps in foliage. And then it moved. When it moved, I could see there was a whole lot more fur than just a shaggy mop, and also that this hair was covering something much, much larger than even my Jotun of a coworker. I saw it begin to take one slow, quiet step, and decided not to stick around any longer. Ran till my lungs burst, and practically crawled my way back up the switchbacks to our trucks. Hid in one of the trailers till the rest of my crew showed up. I asked if anyone had seen anything on their way back. No one had. I still don't know what I saw. I tell myself it was an elk. Makes sense, given the season and location, but I never knew an elk to walk on 2 legs. I was driving through rural NJ one night, headed home from a day of work in NYC. I was on Route 78, but there was some construction or an accident, so 78 was shut down and I had to take an exit. No problem, GPS rerouted me, and all was good. It was late at night, and fairly rural, so I didn't notice right away that there were no other cars around. None ahead, behind, or oncoming traffic. The moon was out, one of those nights you could have driven perfectly fine with no headlights, but of course mine were on. Just ahead of my headlight range on the right side of the road I see eyes glowing, so I slow down. As the animal comes into my headlights I can see it looks like a cat, maybe a raccoon or a possum. But then the animal started to run, and it clearly hopped as it ran. It wasn't large, maybe shin height on me, and I am 6'2". Then, to my surprise, it spread its wings and flew off. The wingspan I would have estimated at about 5 to 6 feet across. I called my brother, woke him up and told him what I saw, and he sent me a picture in the morning of the Jersey Devil, and the wings looked exactly like they did in the picture. Realistically, I probably saw an owl catch some prey, and when my lights came down the road it tried to hop and fly off the side of the road, but damn, 10 years later and I will not drive through rural NJ that late at night. I'm an environmental monitor for oil companies up in Alberta, Canada. A consultant and I went to this old well pad way out in the bush. We were looking for water wells that were there but not recorded, so they had to be visually found and marked on the GPS. We went through this trail, and when we found a few, we decided to come back later and look for more. A week later we came back, and on the trail there were trees about 1 to 2 inches bent down over the trail. Not totally weird, but what was is that at the bottom of the trees something twisted the tree like a wet dish rag and then bent the trees down. If they just pushed the trees down, then they would spring back up. Whatever it was smart enough to know that the twisted trees would stay down. No animals could do this. Only logical explanation was that maybe a little tornado touched down on that specific spot and then lifted back up. And whatever it was really strong to twist trees like that. Or it was Bigfoot warning us to stay away from their lol. Either way it was odd. I have been a ranger in the USFS for almost 15 years, but this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar on hanging around campsites. Weird, since wolves aren't known to be in the area, but when you work in the field long enough you start to realize anything is possible. No calls had mentioned violent behavior from the animal, thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that it had been sighted. Wandered around for about 3 hours, no further calls during that time, until I took a break for water. Sat down, had a snack, drank some water and was getting ready to go again when the thing was about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar, so I whistled to it and he came over to me. Getting a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and didn't have the right body structure, though I could see why it'd be confusing from a distance. I radioed in and reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said I'd bring it in, the dog ducking took off. Like he was playing, to see how far he could get me to chase him. Typical dog behavior. I went after it, and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we steadily ran through the forest. Please don't go running through woods unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed/creek area, and started pacing around a spot. I drew closer and didn't see anything off at first, then I noticed it. The overgrowth had almost disguised what appeared to be bones. I called it in immediately, and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog, he was just gone. But, honestly, it wasn't a priority at that point. He was friendly enough, and I figured we'd catch up with him later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's, died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He'd been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there'd been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mom on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how I'd found her son. I mentioned the black dog, then thought I'd said something wrong since there was a pause on her side of the line. After I gave a couple details about the dog, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunken into a deep depression after the death of his best friend, the very dog that had led me to him. I think I spent the rest of the day stunned. I continue to be in disbelief, in a way. But I know what happened. Not a ranger, but back when we were about 14, my friends and I went up to stay at our buddy's family farm in rural New Hampshire. Not much up there besides farmland and miles of deep woods. It was around midnight, and we had just spent a few hours ducking around, smoking cigars and building a bonfire up in one of the cow pastures. To get back to the house from the pasture, you needed to walk about half a mile through the woods and across another field, and the kid's dad had a tradition of messing with us on our way back. The usual routine was waiting on the porch and shooting Roman candles at us as we crossed the field. We started walking back, and as we emerged from the path, we started hearing loud rustling noises in the trees along the edge of the field about 70 yards away. We all ran into the middle of the field and hit the deck smiling, thinking my buddy's dad was about to start shooting fireworks at us. After about 5 minutes of the intermittent leaf rustling and no Roman candles, our smiles were gone and we started debating if it was a black bear or some other big animal. The rustling was distinctly the sound of footsteps, and would pick up and suddenly stop as if someone was running tree to tree. Thoroughly freaked out, my buddy pulls out his cell phone and calls the landline at his house. He stands up and walks a little in the direction of the house while my other friend and I stay laying down, staring in the direction of the noises. Suddenly, something runs out of the tree line. I will never forget this image for as long as I live. We were still about 50 yards away and there was only a crescent moon out, so there wasn't much light to make out fine details, but we watched as this inhumanly tall thing strode across a portion of the field and then back into the trees. It was skinny, with disproportionately long limbs, and in the dark appeared to be a solid light gray/white color. As it ran, its incredibly long arms and legs swung in this disturbingly unusual way, and it appeared to be moving much faster than it should have been. As fast as it had appeared, it was gone back into the forest. My friend and I looked at each other in silent horror. We stand up, ready to book it back to the house. My other friend walks back over to us, oblivious to what we just saw. His dad picked up. He said he's been in bed for an hour. Without saying anything, me and my friend who witnessed it started sprinting for our lives back to the house. The other friend follows suit. We make it back, lock all the doors and recount what we saw to the other friend and his dad. None of us slept that night. When we went downstairs in the morning, my friend's dad, whose bedroom was on the ground floor, tells us how throughout the night he heard something banging on the side of the house and windows, and claimed he went out several times with his shotgun to find nothing. We thought he was just ducking with us at the time, but to this day he stands by that story. As someone who doesn't believe in the paranormal, it's not a story I tell often, but the two friends who were there and I still talk about regularly, and it scares the shit out of us. Just this year, I shared it with another buddy of mine who loves that type of stuff, and after a quick Google search he shows me this link along with a few others. Scroll down to Wood Devil. Link in the description. When I saw it I nearly shit my pants. The description and depiction of this creature from local folklore matched what I saw perfectly. I honestly don't know what to believe, but I know what I saw, and it's safe to say you're never going to catch me in the NH woods past sunset again. Bonus creepiness. The stretch of forest adjacent to his family's farm has been known locally as Bones Wood and Devil's Wood for as long as his family has lived in the area, several generations. I was a ranger for a bit out in Denali National Park. Denali in the winter isn't really a camping destination, but you have the occasional kook who wants to try it out, and more often than not we're the ones who have to rescue them, or at least what's left. It was nearing the end of January, beginning of 2009. We got a call about a fire out in the bush, campfire, probably, and expected from campers, but the ranger we sent to check on the campers never returned. So out I went. It was only a half-hour hike, but as I neared I started to worry. Ranger's intuition, I guess. The ambient noises all seemed to go away. Even the wind had died. Only as I got closer to the site did I notice the tracks. It was a bear, and a big one. You work up there long enough you can easily tell a small animal from large based off their prints. I wasn't wrong. There was a tent, half standing. It looked like it had been peeled open like a tuna can. Blood trailed from the entrance about 15 feet away. The body stank already, an acrid smell of burnt hair and flesh. You smell it once, you never forget it. I stood about 10 feet away and fumbled for my phone. When I looked up there it was the biggest bear I'd ever seen. Fear incarnate. Its paws were shimmery with blood. Hell knows where it even came from so fast, and quiet. It scooped a huge pile of snow and dirt onto the bodies. Watching it act, I only then realized they were on top of a now extinguished campfire. The bear stood up, 15 feet tall at least, and stomps towards me. I couldn't even move. You don't even know fear. 3 feet away it leans down face to face. Through the stench of its flesh-rotten breath and the terror pinning me to the ground I notice one thing. It has a hat on. A familiar hat. It's a ranger's hat, much like mine. Probably belonged to the guy I was sent to find. God bless him. The bear raised a claw and points back at the campfire. Then it uses the same claw to poke me in the chest to emphasize its words. Yes, its words. Maybe it was the fear, a hallucination of sheer terror, but the bear spoke. Only 2 words, with a voice made of growling, endless horror. Only. You. Then it stood up and turned around. The sheer relief of watching it leave caused me to faint, and when I woke up I was back at the lodge, lying on a medical cot. I told my story to everybody and only the newer rangers dismissed it as hysteria. Oh, he just got too close to a bear and his mind freaked out, they thought. The older rangers, the lifers, they all just nodded in silent acceptance. Gotta be careful. One of them said. Nobody ever spoke of it again. One of my best buds from college was a geologist major that ended up becoming a ranger in the southeast US. Haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 to 9 years back he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row, and found out they were visiting from out west, and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot they'd taken pics of where he popped the question but were having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle, then hiked with them to where he thought it would be. They found it, and he left them there and went back to his station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back. And felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came time to lock up at night he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it, left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance, and went back to where he left them. He found both of them lying down spooning along the bank of the river. Neither were alive. He called the cops. Went through the 9 yards, and went home. The police were able to disclose to him their identities, but weren't sure anything else initially. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they had both ended their lives by ingesting some sort of chemical/pill combination medley. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged at. My bud wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad for about them dying, but said that he thought they hadn't asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think they helped kill them. Now I'm not a forest ranger, but I have lived in a forest my whole life and there's something that just doesn't sit right with me here. Don't call me crazy. My entire childhood I have lived in the forest with my family. Out of all of them, I'm the only one who loves to go into the woods. I'm drawn to it. I take hour and mile long walks, alone sometimes but usually I go with a friend. I always bring a weapon, even though I'm confident that there's nothing there that will hurt me. Here there is no dangerous animals that I have seen with the human eye, but I have come into close contact with things that even I can't explain. When I was 9 years old I was having a birthday party in the middle of October. It was warm, the perfect day to go trek through the woods with some buddies. We started to head through my yard and towards the tree line, but then we stopped. One of my friends spotted something in the trees. A person? An animal? Nothing around here would have that white of a coat. This thing stood on 2 legs so it couldn't be a cottontail deer. There was something out there but none of us wanted to figure that out, so we ran. When I was 11 I was out on the rooftop, gazing up at the stars and looking down at my phone occasionally. Suddenly a sound started echoing around me. I thought it was an owl, but then the sound turned more into some sort of mountain lion or bobcat in distress sound. The noise changed many times, making different animal sounds, once even screaming like a girl. A fox maybe? I was too frightened, dialing everyone I knew while I was curled up in a ball against the side of the house. When I was 13 I came in contact with that white thing at the base of my neighbor's driveway. Never again would I ever peer around at night. Later that day I heard some sort of moose sound, but moose don't live around here. My entire life I have heard stories from one of my brothers about a Revolutionary War soldier circling the house, and once I saw it, but only once. That was it. I always felt safe because of it, it's sort of protecting me. Call me crazy, but nothing will keep me out of those woods. Nothing it has thrown at me so far, that is. I was 12 at the time, 1998, and my friends and I decided to go on a hike in our rural area in Nova Scotia, Canada. We packed lunches, and set forth up a really big hill and into the woods. We are subdivision kids, we only play in each other's yards or backyard, and sometimes the wooded area between our houses if there was any. Roughly a half hour in, we notice a path that looked like a road that 4-wheelers might have made. As we continue on, there's like 8 of us, ages ranging between 8 to 12, we see a wide area in the woods that was made into a camping site. Beds were made out of fresh brush, there was a fire pit with stacked wood, just a really cool spot. We thought maybe Boy Scouts set this up, as training exercises or something. So we settled down and eat our snacks, still admiring these perfect beds. We were laughing and carrying on, coming up with silly names on what to call this place. We knew this would be a great place to hang out. It was late afternoon, sun still shining, and my friends wanted to go home. I told them I was going to stick around and see what else I could find in the area. They tried to get me to come back with them, but I told them I'd be soon leaving after looking around. I laid on the grass/brush bed and looked up at the sky, seeing the bright blue sky with very few clouds and a light breeze. I was so relaxed. I felt so proud to have helped discovered something. Then I heard a branch snap. I sit up, and start to look around. Nothing out of the ordinary. I see trees upon staggered trees, until I look far in the distance something hanging from a tree. It's far away, and at 5 feet 9 inches and 170 pounds, I was a fat kid though I did play a lot of sports. So, husky? I figured I'd be bigger than whatever else is in these woods. Stupidly, I get up and walk towards it. I still can't make out what it is, but as I keep walking, I start to audibly let out some nervous laughter. I get closer to it, roughly 80-ish feet away, and it looks like a body. I freeze. Now I'm panicking. Is my eyes playing tricks on me? There's no ducking way, that's what I think it is. For whatever reason I'll never know, uncharacteristically of me I continue to walk towards it. My heart is racing and my legs are becoming weaker and weaker. I get close enough to actually see it is in fact a body hanging from a tree. I freak the duck out and run the other way. As I'm running like my ducking life depends on it, my mind is racing faster than my legs. I run, and run, and run, until finally I catch up with the others. They ask me why I was running, and I'm trying so hard to catch my breath. They're all asking what's wrong, and I'm trying so hard to catch my breath I actually fell over. They all gathered round me trying to help and frantically asked questions while the friends my age were crying. In between my breaths I told them I saw a body hanging. Now everyone is crying. We sat down, far away from the campsite, and I'm describing what happened. What I will never forget for as long as I live, was how ducking gross the face looked. Has anyone seen Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves? The scene where Robin's father is in the contraption high above, burnt and decayed? That's what it looked like. Told my parents, they didn't believe me. By this time it was dark and there was no way in hell I was going up there that night. I told them I'd show them tomorrow morning. I didn't sleep at all. All I could think of was that horrible looking face. My mind wouldn't stop racing, thinking about it over and over. Finally it was light out, and I woke my parents up and got ready to show them. We walked back to the place and found the brush beds. I showed them where I laid, and where I started looking. I couldn't see where it was. So I told them to follow me as I tried remembering which direction it was in. I kept walking, whimpering, waiting to see the body again. I didn't. It was gone. I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods and some weird shit happened often, but most of the time it was easy to explain. One thing happened though that to this day scares the living shit out of me. I was a leader for the age group 8 to 10 years old and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain and it was huge. Normally we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids arrive, so we were aware of any possible dangerous spots to avoid. This time it was impossible. Every camp we have what we call a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the ever-loving shit out of them. Obviously we had one too during that camp. We masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods close to the checkpoints they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides behind trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end and I saw the shadow again. This time I could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders hiding to scare kids and decided to go over there as it was about time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree and while getting closer I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack and had their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off. I asked if everything was okay but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound that sounded like someone knocking on wood. Nevertheless I went a bit closer until I was about 10 meters away from this person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud. His hands were in a weird cramped position. I was convinced this was just one of the other leaders pulling a prank, so I told them to knock it off. He slowly turned his head and started walking towards me. Something inside me just told me to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank it felt like I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me but I didn't want to turn around to look as I'd probably run into a tree. I arrived back at the campsite and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there. They couldn't have gotten there before me, and if they did they sure as hell didn't have the time to change into their regular clothes. Still, I told them and that they gave me a good scare with that. They just looked weird at me, thinking I was trying to scare them, and we left it at that. Next day I wanted to go check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I took someone else with me just in case, and there was nothing but endless trees. We arrived at the tree where I saw the person banging his head and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit nailed to the tree. We called the cops. They looked around quickly and brushed it off as just a prank from another scouting group or some kids from the nearby town and left it at that. We didn't notice anything weird after that, so it probably was a dumb prank, but seriously some people have a ducked up sense of humor. I was the lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho. Nearest town from guard station was about 1.5 hours away by car. After moving into the guard station, solar power was not working, and I hadn't slept for about a month due to various factors: bats in the cabin, something walking on the deck at night. The woods there always had an eerie feeling to them, unlike the southwest ponderosa forest that I was used to. About 2 months into the seasonal job, I started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night, perhaps even on the door. Now this district was known for its badgers and beavers, so I didn't think much of it. When leaving the cabin at night, I always had an eerie feeling like I was being watched. One night, I was returning from my grocery run, always went on Tuesday nights, and I had a bad feeling. At the time, I did not have my shotgun in the vehicle. After stepping out of the vehicle, I looked to the right of the cabin, about 50 feet from my front door. All I could see were two eyes about 3.5 to 4 feet in the air. To say I freaked out was an understatement. I started yelling, "Get the duck out of here," but the eyes only crouched down, and inched closer. At this point I could tell it was a large animal of some kind, definitely not a coyote. I tossed a piece of firewood in the general area and the creature leapt back a bit but did not make a sound. Tossed 4 or 5 more pieces and creature still inched forward. At this point I fumbled with the keys, of course the ducking solar power was out again. I managed to get inside and grabbed my shotgun. Technically, you are not supposed to have guns in gov housing, but who the duck lives in the hills have eyes backcountry and does not carry. Went outside, creature was bit closer. Still could not get a good look with my shitty headlamp. Loaded shotgun and continued to throw pieces of wood with one hand. Finally the creature walked back into the brush. That night, I drank about 4 IPAs and slept with my shotgun. In the morning, trail crew came up and we found mountain lion tracks all over the porch, rocking bench, and compound leading back to the creek. After that event, I always heard the rocking chair move and someone or something walking on the porch, but never found any tracks after that point. Considering that it was always muddy up there, it was weird to not find any tracks. I've been stalked by mountain lions before and never had that eerie feeling like I did in those woods. Was hiking in Andorra with a friend. Long story short, we got lost off the trail and ended up in Spain. Found another trail and were following it, without a map. A while ahead of us we see a man with 2 golden retrievers walking in the same direction we are. He looks young and is carrying climbing gear over his shoulder. We're rushing down the trail to catch up with him and finally do. We ask him for help with directions, and he tells us exactly where we are and where we need to be. About 12 kilometers away there's a town with a hotel. He says there's another, smaller, town about 6 kilometers away and that he parked his car there. He says he can give us a lift for the last 6 kilometers if we like, but says that he's in a hurry. We are over the moon and so we hike together for a while. The dogs are nice and friendly, running circles around us. We are chatting away to the guy and he is really nice, but my friend and I are getting tired and so we cannot keep pace with him for long. The trail bends away to the right and the man, now a bit ahead of us, disappears behind the bend. We get there a couple of minutes later, and the trail is empty, no man, and no dogs, even though the trail is a straight run for quite a while and we should have been able to see them. The two of us continue on, alarmed, waiting to hear/see something, or perhaps be murdered by a stranger. Nothing. We get to the town eventually, and from there made it to the safety of the hotel in the next town over. We were completely freaked out by his sudden disappearance and to this day we are both convinced he was a ghost. My grandpa had a hunting buddy in the 70s who was basically a hermit in the woods of the Pacific Northwest. He was staying with him in his cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains during a hunting trip. No running water, no electricity. Miles away from the nearest town or paved road. His cabin was built on stilts and on an incline. It had a 10-foot balcony from the base of the bottom of the stilts with no stairs or ladder to climb up on. My grandpa claims that he knew this man for a long time, and said that he didn't have the personality to lie. I've also known my grandpa to never be one for bullshit. One night, during the trip, they were relaxing at the cabin after a hunt and his buddy tells him that Sasquatch is in the area and to be careful going out at night. Thinking he was pulling his leg, my grandpa chuckled and didn't think much about it. His friend then put on a very serious face and grabbed a few pieces of fruit, bread, and jerky and placed them in a bowl. He took the bowl out onto the balcony and set it on the edge and said it'll be empty in the morning, and then went to bed. It was an open floor single room cabin, about 300 square feet. My grandpa had a cot set up near the balcony window and was woken up in the middle of the night by rustling outside. He peeked through the window and saw the bowl, empty, and to this day still claims he saw 4 fingers resting on the edge of the balcony just before letting go. He never went hunting in that area again. We were camping along the Sunshine Coast in lower mainland British Columbia. It was the off-season so not too many campers in the area and we were in some beautiful land, lush jungle-like forested areas right beside the ocean. 5 a.m. in the morning, right before dusk, right behind our tent, we were camping by literally no other people. I hear hoo-ee, hoo-oh-ee, as loud as can be. I woke the duck up real quick and asked my husband if he heard that and what he thought that was. He says, "Do you want me to be honest with you?" Yes? I think it was a Sasquatch and I'm like, no way, Therese, just no way. I started thinking about all the animals in the area and different calls they would make, and I'm a pretty avid camper and live in the country, so I do recognize calls of different animals. Cougar? Bear? No, nope. Owl? Nope. I didn't go to sleep and kept the knife in my hand for another hour before the sun came up, while I was on my phone googling what Sasquatch sounds like. I know there's a ton of conspiracy around this, but we did find a recording of a supposed Sasquatch that sounded similar to what we heard. Can't find it now, I'll keep looking. We went into town later that day and told a local, and he's like, yeah, lots of sightings around here. The natives even have totems dedicated to them. Well, shit. My dad spoke to a Chinese woman who lived as a forest survey person up in the mountains for the past 30 or so years. This is in Canada about 5 years ago. As an unofficial sort of person, the government asked about when looking for forest fires, any sort of illegal shit, etc. She says that she spotted multiple Sasquatch and that they are quite intelligent and just don't want to interact with people, not even the young ones, but if she's out there they're pretty chill about it because she grew up around that area and remembers seeing them from a young age. She had a totally straight look on her face, and my dad said she's one of the most rational people he'd seen out there. He owned a strip of gold claim out that way at the time, and she said if he knew what was good to leave that land alone because digging it up would disturb a lot of shit in the area and she wasn't sure it was a good idea. My dad wasn't so sure until he swears, up and down, he saw one himself, and she said that's the female one and just went inside and left him out there to take the duck off running. Back in 2010 I had just finished a wilderness leadership class and decided to go to Colorado to get some solo wilderness time. I found out about some hot springs near the Colorado River that were only accessible during the winter. During the summer the snow melt raises the water level of the river and they become submerged, and decided to go spend a few weeks out there. It was on BLM land and I had about a 4-mile hike from where I parked to where I was camping. The BLM lady who watched the land saw me when I arrived and asked me to just write the date on my windshield every week to let her know I'm still alive out there. Anyways, it was pretty pleasant out there, but every night I was terrified of the bears. They should be sleeping, but if they aren't it means they are hungry as duck and I'm for dinner. For this reason I decided to set up camp close to a cliff. It was about 40 down to the river and I figured, worst case scenario I could jump and then get to the hot springs to prevent hypothermia. It's a crazy plan, but once you're out there you realize bear spray is kinda useless inside the tent. So one early morning I hear these loud animal noises outside my tent. They are getting closer and very loud, accompanied by grunting and breathing noises. I was too scared to open my tent, I just froze. And the steps kept getting closer and closer and closer. At this point I could hear it sniffing my tent. I don't dare move, I just lay there. It starts to move away from my tent but it's still out there, and now I hear more than one animal. I finally poke my head out, and it's a herd of elk. I swear though, it was probably the most scared I've ever been out camping.